Support for Steppin' Out is made possible by local author Sarada Bonnet. In Notes of Forgiveness, Bonnet shares her childhood story as daughter of famed rockabilly singer Sherry Davis. Notes of Forgiveness, available in bookstores and at saradabonnet.com. A Steppin' Out special. It's Carnival time.
I'm Peggy Scott Laborde. What makes the first weekend of Mardi Gras so special? And how about all those new walking clubs? And what's new for Mardi Gras 2015? All of this on a very special edition of Steppin' Out. It's Carnival time. As is tradition, at our table, Arthur Hardy, publisher of Arthur Hardy's 39th annual edition of his Mardi Gras Guide, and Mardi Gras New Orleans, an illustrated history. Arthur also covers Carnival for WDSU TV, WWL Radio, and the New Orleans Advocate. Hey, Arthur.
Hey, and I'm Steppin' Out, too.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And Errol Laborde, editor of New Orleans Magazine and the author of the new book, Mardi Gras Chronicles of the New Orleans Carnival. Errol also contributes Mardi Gras commentary to WWL TV. Good to see you, Errol.
Hi.
Well, before we talk about what's ahead, let's reflect on what happened last year, Errol.
Well, it's hard to get past the ending, and the ending last year was terrible, and that was Mardi Gras Day. You know, last year Mardi Gras was late. It was March 4th.
Yeah.
And people said, oh, in March it's going to be nice. And it was like maybe the worst ever in terms of weather, in terms of the combination. There have been cold Mardi Gras and rainy Mardi Gras, but the two of them. Now, Rex still came and Zulu still came, but the soul of Carnival was lost.
Yeah.
And that was in the quarter. I remember walking through the quarter, there was nobody there. There was no music, no masquerading, no spirit. It was just a dead, dreary day. And that was really a disappointment because that's the part of Carnival that I really like the most. We do have good news, though, okay? With modern innovation, we've learned from our voodoo technology, where we have voodoo dolls to ward off evil. We have the Arthur Hardy doll.
Oh, okay. Let's hold him up here.
And this is designed to ward off bad weather on Mardi Gras. And Peg, we can do this right now. What you do is you rub his head.
Okay.
Now, you know we have the tradition with St. Joseph statues that you bury them upside down to sell a house. The good news, you don't need to bury this upside down. You can just put it on the bookshelf. And if you do this, we'll have beautiful weather for Mardi Gras. Besides that, last year was the 75th anniversary of Hermes in Babylon, and in the way that Mardi Gras, counts its anniversaries, they were both started in different years. Yet it was the 75th anniversary for both of them, and it was the recreation of the crew of Ferret. There used to be a crew of Ferret. It went away. It used to parade down Ferret. It came back down the standardized St. Charles route. So it was good to see that name back in the parade schedule.
Absolutely. And Arthur, I'm sure you share the fact that it was cold and rainy and not very pleasant.
I was out there for 10 hours covering it, and it was impossible to get comfortable.
We can look ahead to good stuff, hopefully.
I had to make up a list. I've got 10 here in no particular order. So, this is the lightning round. Napoleon Avenue. Yes, the construction is going to interfere with our viewing, but not with the parades roll. They'll roll down Napoleon. The construction area will be cordoned off. There'll be 6 feet in the neutral ground to stand, but no ladders. So the show goes on. Gallia Hall has problems, as we know, with the building, some of it falling down. Yeah. So the mayor will not toast from Gallia Hall, but some stands right next door. Record membership. Endymion cracks 3,000 members. It's just, what can you say? Nick's has become the largest female club with 1,500 members, and we've got 2 new female crews, both African-American, one in Metairie, one in New Orleans. Alla's going co-ed this year, first time in 83 years. We've got something new in the first weekend called Concert on the Square at Lafayette Square, opposite Gary Hall.
That'll be fun.
It's kind of a Family Gras knockoff in Orleans Parish. And speaking of Family Gras, they've got Leanne Rimes and the Beach Boys. Good lineup. In Metairie, Atlas and Zeus are gone from the parade calendar. The New Orleans Advocate, which reintroduced Carnival Bulletins last year, is doing 16, I think, this year. It's terrific. Good celebrities, Endymion, Luke Bryan, Orpheus, Dierks Bentley, John C. Reilly, and Bacchus. And finally, Rex awarded $860,000 in grants to 27 nonprofits. Has nothing to do with parades, but a nice touch. And one more thing, speaking of Rex, no more river arrival in Mardi Gras, coming in an antique vintage railroad car. How cool is that?
That's exciting, huh?
It is. You know, when I first heard about it, I was kind of stunned. What, wrecks not arriving by boat? But then the more I thought about it, I realized that the railroad is really more a part of Rex's history than the boat is, because Rex began in 1872, and that was the age when passenger railroads were really coming into their own. The first transcontinental railroad was finished in 1869, and so that was a big thing to take the railroad across the country. Louisville and Nashville had started in the 1850s, but they hadn't expanded, and so they were coming into New Orleans during that period. And you read the literature about that first Rex parade, and one thing they talk about is that they prepared circulars which were distributed to railroad stations up and down the line, urging people to come to New Orleans to see the parade of the King of the Carnival. They didn't say Rex. They said the King of the Carnival. And around the country, I mean, in other cities, Mobile had parades, but that year they created King Felix, which was a King of Carnival character. Memphis, a lot of cities created Carnival or embellished their carnival in 1872. And we also found out some European cities did. 1873, Via Regia, where many years later Blaine Kern would go to study float building technique. And I think the common denominator for all of them is the railroad, that we were getting into the era of steam power and mass transportation, and the railroads needed to create events to bring people to. And I bet if you looked at enough of at many of these carnivals, you'd find some railroad money behind trying to embellish and trying to give reasons for people to create. And we know in some of the early Mardi Gras, it was a big thing. You're coming from another destination and you have a Pullman car and you stay in the train during the whole time. So railroads are a very important part of the evolution of Carnival.
Early tourism, yes.
Absolutely.
And I know, Arthur, concerning the present, you wanted to talk a little bit about the first weekend of Carnival.
They're the Rodney Dangerfields of Mardi Gras. They don't get no respect, you know. Twice their parades have been moved because of Super Bowl. There are actually more parades on the first weekend than the second, by 5. It's a good mixture of, we have the 3 newest crews on that weekend and 3 from before World War II, Carrollton, Alla, and Choctaw. You know, many consider this weekend the locals weekend because it's easier to park, to find restrooms, but visitors are starting to find out hotel rooms aren't as expensive. Crowds are getting much bigger on that first weekend. I did some numbers and found out you could plant your chair at Lee Circle from Friday night to Sunday, and in 48 hours, you would see 11 parades.
Pontchartrain, Sparta, I don't think I named
there's 5 that day, 4 on Sunday.
Yeah.
200 floats and 75 marching bands just at that corner on the first weekend. So it's really grown in quantity and in quality. Some fun parades. You don't have to be a Bacchus to put on a nice parade.
No, indeed. You know, one of the things that we love about Carnival is that it's steeped in history. And I know you've been doing a little bit of research on that, a little sleuthing.
Yeah, you know, we all know the story about the Grand Duke Alexis, and I think Errol and I think I've contributed too to debunking that myth. You know, Rex didn't start because of the Grand Duke's visit, nor did he come to see Lydia Thompson, although he did have some interest in her. For anyone who doesn't know, she's the one who introduced what has become the official anthem of Carnival, If Ever I Cease to Love. And she was an international star, starting in 1868, her first tour in the United States. She introduced burlesque here, and we're not talking about strip shows, we're talking about comedic acting. And I've been collecting photographs of her for years, and she's a fascinating woman. So on a trip to England this year, my wife and I decided to visit the cemetery. I knew where she was buried. And we marched in there and said, we'd like to see Lydia Thompson's tomb. And they said, who? Long story short, she's buried in a grave that, well, it wasn't unmarked when they buried her, but now it's completely gone. And it was really kind of sad.
Is this outside of London, or where is it?
This is outside
roughly?
of London in Kensal Green. And it was a bittersweet trip, but I just thought that, you know, that she should not have a unmarked headstone. So I've actually started collecting funds, and a couple of organizations have stepped up, and we're going to see about getting a proper headstone and maybe putting the lyrics to If Ever I Cease to Love on it back in England.
Gee, just learning more and more about the history. It's stuff that just comes up every year. I know you really make an effort to try to do that.
Well, I think Errol and I and Henri Schindler, you know, we're all trying to contribute to it. You really don't have to make this stuff up. The truth is just every bit as fascinating as some of the myths. So let's find it out. You know,
and her presence really helped create create the myth. Apparently, the Grand Duke and Lydia had been, they were both breaking a circuit around the country. I think it was in St. Louis,
Yep.
that they were both at the same town at the same time.
Right.
And the Grand Duke saw her perform, and he sent her a bracelet. And the American press, I think, took that as a sign of love. I mean, when you're Grand Duke, you give a bracelet to everybody that you see, right?
And he did.
Okay. And so even though there's a big age difference, I think Lydia was, 36, and
Yeah.
the Grand Duke was like 21, and there's evidence that the Grand Duke, if he was interested in any woman at all, by the way, he was married already in Russia, even though even though the court wasn't too fond, but there was a woman named Lada Crabtree who was also a performer. But the fact that he was there and that Lydia had performed this song, From Whichever I Cease to Love, really, it was just these elements that came together that just helped create the romance at first Mardi Gras.
We also found out that she already had a child at that point, and that was something I had not put together before. But anyway, it was fascinating, and kind of glad we did it, and I hope we can get that plaque erected at some point while I'm still around.
Yes, indeed. Well, back to the present, Errol, the proliferation of walking clubs. It's something we talk about fairly regularly because it keeps on expanding.
Well, you know, the different categories of walking clubs, there are some fairly old ones. There's in Arthur's book this time around, he talks about the Jefferson City Buzzers, which is celebrating their 125th anniversary this year. You've got the Corner Club and the Lions Clubs, and these are groups from uptown that go and they march on the morning of Mardi Gras, and usually they have a warm-up march sometimes within the weeks before that. And so they've been doing their own thing for a long time, really independent of another parade. What you've seen the growth of in the last few years is the walking clubs that are inside another parade. And I think Muses has been a real catalyst allowing these sort of things. Not the only one, but some. And so you started seeing like the Bearded Oysters, the Camel Toe Steppers, the Rolling Elva. Some of these names are really double entendre. You really have to think about them. Okay, the Mufflers, and on and on.
Organ grinders, the list is long.
The organ grinders. And so, look, again, you got to think about some of these names. But what it is this. What excites me about them is it allows this new generation of people to be involved with in Mardi Gras. There's someone in my office who belongs to one of these, and she's been living in New Orleans maybe 5 years now. She's in the probably late 30s, but now she could participate, and she's marching in 4 or 5 downtown parades. And so I like them in that they've brought participation down to the street level for the people participating, and also for the people who are seeing. And some of them have done quite well. And a few of them now have grown to the point where they have events during their years, and they're having events. They're doing their own fundraisers for they're getting to that point now. So I think it's a very happy development in Carnival. Plus, you have a few, like the Ducks of Disneyland and Mondo Cayo and Cosmic Degree, that are sort of independent of all that. They're around on Mardi Gras in the Marigny area, but in the case of the Ducks of Dixieland, they're also in Tux. So there's different degrees of these groups, but I love the way that they allow more people to participate.
Yeah, a lot of energy. There's a new group of people who might be a little past their prom called the Amelia Earharts, Hawts.
Okay.
That's going to be fun. Of course, we can't forget Pete Fountain. It's not really a walking club. They march and drink. And Pete will ride this year. Of course, he's on the streetcar float. But you're right. It's just a great element of Carnival.
And there's a group in motorized recliner chairs.
There's a lazy boy.
The lazy boys, and I think that's good. The one thing you got to qualify about 610 Stompers, though, is the 610 Stompers did not start because of Mardi Gras.
You're right.
They started because of the Buddy DiLiberto parade, the year that the Saints were in the Super Bowl. But they certainly reflect the spirit of Mardi Gras.
Absolutely. Well, Arthur, we wanted to pay tribute to a very special lady who was very comfortable being behind the camera for many years.
Cindy Byrd, who's not doing real well, has some health issues. She's 71 years old. For my money, probably the best photographer in New Orleans, documentarian, and just has done a wonderful job through the years chronicling Jazz Fest, Cajun Mardi Gras Indians. And she's worked on our publication and with New Orleans Magazine, too, for a couple of decades. And we did a little tribute to her. Her work has been exhibited worldwide. She's in all kind of national publications. But something that a lot of people don't realize is how good of a portrait photographer she was and is. And her secret is in making people comfortable. You know, we'd take pictures of folks who are ordinary people, and she said, my job is to make them feel extraordinary and to bring that magic out in them. And just a wonderful, wonderful woman. Like most creative artists, a terrible business person.
Yeah.
We've been trying to get her book published for years, but she leaves a lot for us to enjoy.
You know, it's one thing to go out on the street and take somebody's picture, and if you're lucky, you get a good picture every so often. She took some backstage at the Carnival balls pictures.
Yes.
Legendary.
And that's not easy to get to. No. It's not easy to get backstage at the ball.
Not at all.
But she was able to do that, and so she's really done some important contributions to Carnival.
Yes, indeed.
Well, Errol, we wanted to also talk about the emergence, even though I guess at Antoine's, those rooms have been around for a while, but you have these special rooms that anybody can dine in, you know, year round, that are named after Carnival organizations with some pretty special memorabilia.
Well, they're getting recognition this year because this year is the 175th anniversary of Antoine's, and so that's drawing attention to it. And when you draw attention to Antoine's, you can't help but talk about the Rex Room, which is the most important room in Rex Room, or arguably the most important single dining room in the city. It's a beautiful room. It's decorated with Rex memorabilia, but also the pictures of every man that's been Rex through its history. A lot of events are held there. You don't need to belong to Rex to have the event. If you have your own private event, you can just rent that room, but it's certainly a prestigious place to be. It is where the Queens, at least the top tier of Queens, for the Rex Queens dinner go. But across the hall from it is the produce room, which is a beautiful room, and it has a lot of produce memorabilia and photos. Up front at Antoine's is what's now called the Hermes Bar. It was the Hermes Room, the site of what used to be some of the rowdiest parties in Mardi Gras. Now is the Hermes Bar. There's still some Hermes memorabilia there, but it's part of that. But something a lot of people don't see is upstairs at Antoine's, off to a corner, is the 12th Night Revelers Room, where there's a lot of photos from there. And it's a beautiful room, and it also has a balcony access to it. And so even if you're not eating there, it's just kind of fun to sneak upstairs. And then new to the scene this past year is Tujague's, where the Coup d'Etat opened a room, and it's on the second floor upstairs. And we have a great room. I mean, what a great room to have fun and to drink and to go and walk out on the balcony, too.
All right. Well, now, did you want to add more to the room?
Breaking news.
Yes?
Next year at this time, there will be a Bacchus room upstairs at Antoine's behind the 12th Night Revelers room and what used to be the Japanese dining room.
Oh, all right.
And they're building a new Brennan's room at... a new Rex room at Brennan's. There used to be one, and then with the changes, but now they're redoing it and bringing the Rex room
back. There's a King's room and a Queen's room there.
All right. Well, now one of my favorite times of our program are our lists. Arthur Hardy, you first.
Well, as I celebrate my 50th high school reunion this year, I look back at Mardi Gras in 1965 and how different it was. There were no super crews. There were no celebrity monarchs. There were no standardized routes. No crew signature throws except the doubloon, of course. There were 9 parades in the French Quarter, and as we know, that ain't there no more.
Yeah.
11 neighborhood parades. Believe it or not, the Municipal Auditorium had 64 balls staged there. There was only 1 parade in Metairie. 2 were scheduled, but 1 had money problems. Sounds familiar? Hundreds of flambeaux. Now we've got about 3 dozen original left. And the wonderful Greatest Bands in Dixie contest was really hitting its stride then. Very, very different. We counted up what we think were the number of riders in all 22 parades that year. 3,100. Endymion has 3,000 this year in 1 parade.
In just 1 parade.
What a difference in 50 years.
And speaking of Endymion, won't there be a float with some kind of new gadgetry?
There's a brand new float at the end of that parade. It's called ETV, Endymion TV, and there's going to be video monitors and screens where you actually see yourself as the float passes. You can wave at yourself. Pretty neat, huh?
It is pretty neat. Errol, your list.
I think your list is fascinating because the one that shows how Mardi Gras sticks to tradition, yet it's not stagnant.
Exactly.
And it's changed over time, too. I did a very arbitrary list of top 6 Mardi Gras Indian songs. And I got to say, some of them are steeped in tradition. Some were created about the Mardi Gras Indians. So number 6 on my list, Corey died on the battlefield. The Wild Magnolias has a best version of this. And I like this because it talks about the early days when the Indians used to meet together and they would do battle. Most often battle was by dancing against each other, but it really tells about the history. And Corey is sort of a composite person across time, but it really tells about the history of it.
Corey died on the battlefield.
Number 5 on my list is Indian Red. This is a really important story if you want to study the Indians, because it's really an homage to the Indians, because it mentions several of the tribes from the early tribes. And so if you listen to the Indian version, it's a beautiful way of talking about these Indians are gathered and who they are. Danny Barker did a version of this, which is not Indian in style at all. It's more of a jazzy Creole version, but it's also a good way. He talks about it's like the same song has 2 versions with the same lyrics, but both of them are really just important to hear.
Oh, how we love the day you call us Indian Red. The wild Squatoon.
Number 4 is Big Chief. This was Earl King. This was not a song that emanated from the Indians. This was Earl King who wanted to write a song about the Mardi Gras Indians, but it certainly reflects the sound of the Indians. And then Professor Longhair picked it up, and it just became a big success. And it's probably one of the best known of the Indian-related songs. And there's Big Chief 1 and Big Chief 2. Number 3, Apaki Way. This is the Meters, a.k.a. the Neville Brothers. The one song that was also picked up by the Grateful Dead. And there's a real cross
Didn't know
element
that.
into, that's why we do this show.
Exactly.
There's a real crossover into funkiness in these songs by people who perform it. And this was like the ultimate in moving, of combining funk and the Mardi Gras Indian sound together. So that's Apaki Way. Number 2 on my list is Giacomo. That was written, the original version from a traditional song was by Sugar Boy and his Cane Cutters. Sugar Boy, you know the line, Sugar Boy, Giacomo Finaye, Sugar Boy says he got it when he heard 2 Creole men arguing, and he tried to transpond what they were saying. There have been people that have tried to translate it, and the most common translation says it has to do with placing a kiss on the posterior, okay? But there's other people who say that it has more to do with looking back, but it's a combination of Indian culture and in Creole. But the phrase itself has really just become to mean in itself. The song by Sugar Boy's estimate did nothing for about 10 years, and the Dixie Cups recorded it. And when the Dixie Cups recorded, it became famous. It was also the lead song to the movie Rain Man, even though it had nothing to do
right at the top,
with the movie. And number 1 on my list, I put Honda Wanda, because that's by Bo Dallas and the Wild Magnolias. Well, we lost Bo Dallas recently. There's several versions of this. Listen to the Bo Dallas version, because he's got this fire in his voice. He's just really amazing. The story behind this is in the 1970s, Quint Davis was at practice for the Indians. He wanted to do a recording. He went to Bo Dallas. He says, hey, write an Indian song. Bo Dallas went home. He was trying to think of an Indian-sounding word. He saw a Honda pass by. Well, he says, Honda sounds Indian. And then he knew a girl named Wanda, okay? And so he said, let's sound this. So he created Honda Wanda. So don't try, don't do like Giacomo Finaye and try to translate what that means, okay? It's just, but it's a wonderful song, and it's certainly got the spirit and the feel of the Mardi Gras Indians.
One thing we have to talk about before we go is just the throws and the preponderance of throws. They've become, some of them have become so big and so specialized. One of the things, though, that I really like is that Rex now has its own throw for its float.
Float-specific throws, I mean, they have the balloons, of course, but the cups and the plush animals and now medallion beads. As far as I know, Rex finally got all of their throws in, but a lot of other clubs have had problems because of some dock strike or almost strikes on the West Coast. Quite a few clubs were worried, will they get here in time? So fingers crossed.
Well, there seems to be more and more of a consciousness towards developing green throws and environmentally friendly throws.
Ain't going to happen.
Really?
You know,
I don't think. I just don't. Mardi Gras is about excess. I don't think people, first of all, it costs a lot more. I don't see any groundswell of support for that idea.
I think you see it in the smaller groups.
Maybe the smaller groups.
You know, the ones that are doing a couple of thousand items or something like that. But you're a long way away from seeing Endymion do it.
Well, I think at this table we still have memories of glass beads from Czechoslovakia.
Yes, indeed.
And the little torture poles made of straw.
And if you got two things off a float, you were lucky. One, if it was Coleman's.
Also, rice beads. I have a vague recollection of rice beads and the Cupid dolls on a stick that these vendors would go by.
And you can buy some of those on eBay for astronomical prices. Or call me. I've got a whole.
Okay. What about the doubloon? As we know, Rex first introduced the doubloon in 1960.
1960, yeah.
Are doubloons still popular, or is it more cups?
They are among a small group of collectors. There are actually more crews throwing more doubloons now than there were 5 years ago.
Really?
But to say it's a real comeback, it's not. We've become kind of jaded. You know, people, I want a lot of gifts, I want them free, and I want them to cost a lot, you know. I mean, a friend of mine in one parade, somebody was giving him a bad time. He said, why don't you just bring a shopping list up to the float? You know, I want 2 dolls, I want 3 cups, and 5 hats. Come on.
You know, as big as everything's gotten, there's still a charm to the little things. Like, for instance, the T-Rex parade, which are the floats made of shoeboxes. So darling.
These alternative parades, again, just like the walking clubs, bring a lot to the table here, you know, and I'm glad to see them.
There's still the intimacy, plus some of these smaller crews. We were talking about Chewbacca, which is inspired by the Star Wars.
You know, there's some of the old parades that I urge people, even though they throw beads, don't worry about the beads, look at the parade, especially the satirical parades.
Yeah, oh,
you know, if you go see Coup d'etat, read the jokes. I mean, don't worry about the beads. You got enough beads already by the time. The Chaos Parade, any of them that deal with satire, you know, do that. Some of them that are historically important, like Proteus and Hermes, which is always like a really beautiful parade in Babylon. Look at the floats. I mean, the float designers put a lot of thought into what they're doing and what they're trying to say.
And that Monday night, now as we refer to it as Mardi Gras, you've got this incredible contrast of Proteus and then what's spraying beyond with Orpheus. You know, you've got the old and the new right there.
You have two of the most beautiful parades in Mardi Gras back to back. One is an old 19th century style and one is a more modern, but it's modern but still not trying to deviate too much from the old style. And so, you know, they'll still do a lot of floral decorations. They're both really pretty parades.
Arthur, I know, of course, many of your years have been spent with bands, being in bands, and then of course being a band leader. That's still such an important component of the parade.
Oh, it absolutely is. And by law in Orleans Parish, you have to have a minimum of 7 bands. I think in Endymion and Bacchus this year you have 30. And but it's very competitive. If you've got 8 parades in one day, you know, how are you going to find 100 bands? So, but it's still one of my favorite parts,
of
course.
And before we go, just a reminder that once again, WYES Channel 12 will present the live broadcast of the 2015 Rex Ball in the meeting of the courts of Rex and the Mystic Crew of Comus. Our show begins at 7:30 Mardi Gras evening. That's February 17th. We'll also, for the first time, be streaming our program live at WYES.org. February 17th. Thank you, Errol and Arthur.
Thanks,
and we leave you with some rare footage of Mardi Gras Day on Canal Street, 1941. And some of that year's Rex Parade. The theme was Gems from the Arabian Nights. Thanks so very much for watching, and happy Mardi Gras.
In a house, in a quadrant, in the street, in the lane, in the road. Turn to the left on the right hand, you'll see there my true love's abode. I go there a-courting and going to my love like a little old dove, and swearing on my bended knees, never I cease to love. May sheephead grows on apple trees, never I cease to love. If ever I cease to love, God help me, if ever I cease to love, may the moon be turned to green, green trees, if ever I cease to love.
Support for Steppin' Out is made possible by local author Sarada Bonnet. In Notes of Forgiveness, Bonnet shares her childhood story as daughter of famed rockabilly singer Sherry Davis. Notes of Forgiveness, available in bookstores and at saradabonnet.com.